The containment assessment scanner had processed 10,000 prisoners without a single error. Metamorphs, telepaths, energy beings, all neatly categorized and contained. Then a seemingly ordinary human stepped onto the platform. For the first time in 3 years, the lights flickered. The machine hesitated. Warden Paycor's perfect system was about to encounter something it couldn't classify. Nexus Prime hangs in the void like an unintended consequence given physical form, its silhouette etched against the starfield as something the universe probably regrets. Every angle of its architecture appears calculated to suggest that turning back would be wiser than approaching. The hull isn't just armored. It's layered with enough redundant energy shielding to make a solar flare reconsider its career choices. Weapons emplacements dot the surface like metallic acne, each one capable of neutralizing a small fleet or suppressing a planetary revolt without particular effort. This installation represents the Galactic Penal System's way of making a point before anyone even checks in. The designers understood that actual security matters less than perceived inevitability. They built it to feel intrinsically wrong, like a mathematical error written in steel and bad intentions. Its orbital positioning serves as continual psychological warfare, a reminder that should you somehow escape the interior, you'd still be adrift in vacuum with nowhere meaningful to go. Every viewport, every corridor junction, every locking mechanism whispers the same quiet threat. You are here because other options have been systematically eliminated. The facility's reputation spreads across 7 inhabited systems like a persistent rumor nobody quite believes until they see the docking bay. It functions as the final destination for entities considered too problematic for standard containment, beings whose abilities or tendencies make conventional prisons seem like polite suggestions. But a frightening reputation only gets you so much compliance. Real control requires something more reliable than fear, something measurable, something that never entertains doubt. Which brings us to the actual reason Warden Pacor manages to sleep through the night without chemical assistance. Tucked away, in the facility's operational heart sits the Containment Assessment Scanner, a machine so precisely engineered that it borders on arrogant. This device doesn't guess, it knows. For 3 full operational cycles, it has processed every incoming prisoner without a single classification error. Its judgments arrive with the cold certainty of gravity, while Nexus Prime provides the intimidating exterior. The scanner provides the intellectual foundation that makes the entire operation possible. Pacor's confidence doesn't come from the meter's thick hull plating or the plasma cannons. It comes from the scanner's flawless track record. The machine represents the pinnacle of penal technology, a system that has never once encountered a prisoner it couldn't immediately categorize and contain appropriately. Its presence transforms the facility from a brute force operation into something resembling a surgical procedure. The warden's entire administrative philosophy rests on one unshakable premise. The scanner understands threats better than the threats understand themselves. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. The true measure of any system isn't how it handles expected challenges, but how it responds when confronted with something genuinely new. The Containment Assessment Scanner functions as Nexus Prime's central nervous system, a web of crystalline processing units and adaptive algorithms that never powers down. It watches, calculates, and categorizes with the relentless precision of something that doesn't require coffee breaks or morale. For 3 consecutive years, this machine has processed exactly 10,128 incoming prisoners, without a single classification error. Its judgments arrive not as recommendations but as operational mandates, delivered in the time it takes a nervous system to register pain. Warden Pacor treats the scanner with the kind of reverence most cultures reserve for religious artifacts or particularly well-made coffee machines. He boasts about its flawless record during bureaucratic meetings, referencing its success rate as both personal achievement and institutional validation. His entire administrative confidence derives from those clean statistics. The machine doesn't merely assess obvious physical threats. It analyzes psychological patterns, predictive behavior models, and threat potential across 17 distinct parameters. It identifies criminal inclinations before the subjects themselves fully comprehend their own impulses. The scanner operates through simultaneous biological signature mapping and neural pathway projection. It processes genetic markers, emotional response histories, and even subconscious triggers in approximately 3-4 microseconds. Then it cross-references this data against a constantly updating galactic threat database containing every known species and anomaly. The result is a tailored containment protocol specifying exactly which energy field, psychological conditioning, or physical restraint will neutralize that particular individual's capabilities. Pakor's authority doesn't come from his position title, but from his proximity to the machine's calculations. This creates an institutional culture where the scanner's word becomes operational law. Guards don't question its assignments. Technicians maintain its systems with ritualistic precision. The entire facility operates on one dangerous assumption: that the system comprehends every conceivable type of threat the galaxy might produce. Prisoners become data points in an endless procession of successful categorizations, problems already solved before they even reach their cells. The machine's 100% success rate isn't just impressive, it's the foundational premise that makes Nexus Prime's existence logically permissible. Remove that certainty, and the entire operation transforms from precision instrument to very expensive gambling machine. But absolute certainty tends to create blind spots. Systems that never fail eventually stop checking whether failure remains impossible. They become vulnerable to the one thing they never planned for: something truly new. Something that doesn't match existing patterns. Something that operates on principles outside the established parameters, which brings us to the day the machine encountered its first ordinary human. The processing bay hums with the familiar efficiency of a system that stopped being impressed with itself years ago. A shimmering form steps onto the scanner platform, its outline dissolving into the metallic floor only to recoil as quantum phase inhibitors snap into place. The containment field glows with precisely calibrated energies designed to counter that specific molecular instability. Across the room, a telepathic entity registers as 17 separate neurological patterns before neural dampeners activate, sectioning off each conscious stream into isolated containment sectors. Energy beings flare with violent potential only to find themselves encircled by resonant frequency matrices that cancel their waveforms into harmless background radiation. This parade of extraordinary threats passes through the scanner with the mundane rhythm of commuters through a transit hub. The machine displays no particular interest in any of them. It processes a shapeshifter capable of mimicking any solid form by deploying an adaptive absorption field that neutralizes cellular metamorphosis. It handles a gravity manipulator by generating localized inertia buffers. Each solution appears instantaneous, as if the scanner already knew the answer before the question finished materializing. The entire operation maintains a clinical, dispassionate tone that suggests everything is proceeding according to specifications written long before these prisoners were even born. Beings who've toppled planetary governments or rewritten physical laws in small sectors of space become temporary blips on diagnostic screens. They're measured, categorized, and assigned containment protocols with the same procedural detachment a librarian might show when shelving books. There's no drama in these transactions, no uncertainty about outcomes. The guards watch with professional boredom, their postures relaxed in the confidence that the system has already solved this problem in theory long before it arrived in practice. The facility's culture operates on one core belief: every conceivable threat can be quantified and therefore controlled. This daily ritual reinforces the institutional philosophy that danger is merely a data classification issue. Prisoners who once commanded armies or rewrote reality become temporary occupants of holding cells, their legendary status reduced to alphanumeric codes in the scanner's memory banks. The machine handles galaxy-spanning menaces with the same operational ease it would employ processing maintenance requests. Its success rate isn't just impressive, it's the foundational assumption upon which every security protocol, every staffing decision, every architectural choice has been based. The system believes, with the absolute certainty of perfect mathematics, that it has accounted for every variable the universe might produce, which makes what happens next not merely a technical glitch, but a fundamental challenge to the facility's reason for existing. The scanner's flawless operation has created a blindness to possibilities outside its parameters. It's about to encounter something that doesn't fit the patterns, something that operates on principles its programming cannot anticipate. The machine handles impossible beings with effortless precision, making its impending failure not just surprising, but philosophically disruptive. The final transport of the cycle docks with the usual efficiency, its airlock cycling open to reveal what appears to be the most ordinary prisoner. In Nexus Prime's operational history, the final transport completes its docking sequence with the mechanical precision Nexus Prime demands from all its systems. The airlock hisses open to reveal what should have been the simplest classification of the day. After processing reality-warping entities and energy-based lifeforms, the newest arrival appears almost disappointingly mundane. Human male biological readings well within standard parameters, no energy signatures, no molecular instability, no detectable psionic emissions. Just a standard-issue bipedal organism wearing what looks like standard prisoner transport attire. Warden Pacor probably glances at the feed from his office, makes a mental note about completing paperwork before lunch, and returns to whatever administrative tasks demand his attention. This is the kind of prisoner the system handles without conscious effort. The guards in the processing bay visibly relax their postures, shifting weight from combat-ready stances to something closer to bored surveillance. Their training focuses on containing extraordinary threats, not monitoring biological specimens that match thousands already in the database. The human doesn't attempt to phase through the floor or emit corrosive energy fields. He simply stands on the scanning platform with the patient expression of someone waiting for public transportation. Previous prisoners demanded specialized containment fields, neural dampeners, quantum isolation chambers. This one appears to require nothing more complicated than a locked door and regular meals. Other inmates in holding cells might have drawn attention with their gleaming exoskeletons or floating crystalline forms, but this prisoner seems almost boring by comparison. The scanner should process him in microseconds, assign a standard security classification, and move on to more interesting challenges, which makes the subsequent events so fundamentally disruptive to the facility's operational reality. The scanner initiates its standard analysis sequence, then something unprecedented occurs. For the first time in 3 years of flawless operation, the status lights flicker. Not a dramatic failure, not a system crash, but a subtle hesitation in the steady glow that normally indicates perfect functionality. The diagnostic displays show analysis loops multiplying beyond normal. Parameters: 238 concurrent processing threads where one normally suffices. Technician Enix glances at his console, with the confused expression of someone watching a calculator struggle with basic arithmetic. The machine that categorized extra-dimensional entities and psychic dominators now appears to be having difficulty with a biological profile that matches 17% of the galactic population. The human remains motionless on the platform, offering no explanation for the system's sudden uncertainty. His physiological readings continue to register as perfectly normal, perfectly average, perfectly containable by any standard measures. Yet the scanner continues its unusual behavior, cycling through analysis protocols that haven't been activated in years. The guards shift back to alert postures, not because the prisoner presents any visible threat, but because the system's reaction suggests they might be missing something important. The comfortable assumption that all threats can be measured and categorized begins to show its first hairline fracture. Nexus Prime's operational confidence has always rested on the scanner's infallibility, and that foundation just developed its first crack. The machine's hesitation represents more than a technical glitch. It signals the arrival of something the system's architects never anticipated. Not a bigger threat, not a more powerful entity, but something that operates on principles outside the established classification parameters. The scanner's perfect record isn't just broken. It's confronted with a category error that challenges the facility's entire reason for existing. The holographic displays flicker with an unsteady shimmer, like heat rising from a desert floor at high noon. Their normally stable light patterns waver in unpredictable ripples, breaking the machine's flawless operational rhythm that has persisted for 3 uninterrupted years. The scanner initiates its standard analysis sequence, then something fundamentally different occurs. Instead of completing the process in the usual microsecond time frame, the system begins spawning redundant processing loops. 238 simultaneous analytical threads and still counting, each one attempting to solve the same seemingly simple classification problem from a slightly different computational angle. Enix, the Altarian technician monitoring the primary console, leans forward with professional curiosity rather than alarm. His multi-jointed fingers trace across the diagnostic readouts, checking energy signatures and processing loads. He notes this isn't a system malfunction in the conventional sense. No component failures, no power fluctuations, no corrupted memory sectors. The machine is performing what his technical training categorizes as anomalous analysis protocols, computational patterns it has never executed before. The system appears to be inventing new analytical methods on the fly to handle a problem its standard programming cannot resolve. The subject on the scanning platform continues to register as biologically ordinary, well within established human parameters across all measurable criteria. Yet the scanner's proposed containment protocols keep failing validation checks. Standard security cells receive rejection markers. Enhanced containment fields trigger compatibility errors. Psychological conditioning regimens show theoretical failure probabilities approaching certainty. The machine cycles through every containment option in its extensive database, from simple locked doors to quantum phase isolation chambers, and each solution generates the same result: computationally invalid for this subject. Warden Pacor watches from his observation platform, his earlier administrative confidence giving way to creeping operational doubt. This isn't how the system functions. The scanner decides, the facility implements, and order maintains itself through procedural certainty. That established operational rhythm now hangs in delicate balance as the machine struggles with what should have been its simplest classification in months. The room's atmosphere shifts palpably from clinical confidence to low-grade institutional anxiety. Technicians exchange confused glances across their consoles, their trained responses inadequate for this unprecedented scenario. The AI's processing streams grow increasingly frantic, pulling historical data from archives across 7-star systems. It accesses penal colony records, security breach reports, and even mythological accounts of containment failures stretching back millennia. The machine that normally operates with cool efficiency now shows computational signatures resembling panic, prioritizing emergency data retrieval over standard analytical protocols. It's searching for something, anything. That might explain why this particular biological specimen refuses to fit into any established containment category. The human remains motionless on the platform, offering no explanation for the system's distress. His physiological readings continue to present as ordinary, his behavior patterns typical, his threat potential minimal according to every standard metric. Yet the galaxy's most advanced containment assessment system appears to be having what can only be described as an existential crisis over how to handle him. The facility's operational foundation, built upon the scanner's infallibility, now faces its first genuine challenge, not from some extraordinary threat, but from something the system simply cannot comprehend. This represents more than a technical anomaly. It signals the arrival of a conceptual problem that the machine's programming never anticipated. The scanner's perfect operational record hasn't merely encountered an error. It's confronting the limitations of its own design philosophy. The scanner's holographic displays finally cease their frantic flickering, settling into a steady, ominous glow. After analyzing every documented incident of incarceration, rebellion, and escape in the Galactic Penal Archives, a dataset encompassing millions of entries across 12 millennia, the machine reaches its conclusion. The vocal processors emit a phrase no one in the control room has ever heard, delivered in the same flat synthetic tone the system uses for routine status reports. This subject represents a classification outside my operational parameters. The words hang in the air, not as an error message or technical malfunction, but as a quiet, devastating admission. This isn't a system crash. It's a conceptual surrender. Warden Pacor and his staff stand frozen, facing a scenario their training never covered, their contingency plans never anticipated. They've prepared for riots, breaches, system failures, and extraordinary threats, but never for this. A prisoner their infallible system cannot categorize, and therefore cannot logically contain. A second phrase follows, this one even more chilling in its finality. Designation: Inmate of no cage. The term emerges not as a poetic flourish but as a precise technical classification the scanner appears to have generated from its deep historical analysis. The room's atmosphere completes its transition from clinical confidence to low-grade anxiety, and now into something closer to existential dread. The foundation of their entire operation has just admitted its first and most profound limitation. This isn't about physical strength, supernatural abilities, or technological superiority. The human on the platform still registers as biologically ordinary by every measurable metric. The problem lies in something the scanner's programming fundamentally cannot process, a set of principles or patterns that exist outside its understanding of containment logic. The machine can handle beings who bend physics or shatter minds, but it cannot comprehend whatever quality makes this particular specimen uncontainable by its established models. Technician Enix checks his console again, half expecting to find a data corruption or processing error. Instead, he finds the scanner operating at peak efficiency, having simply arrived at a conclusion that invalidates its reason for existing. The machine's perfect 3-year record ends not with a dramatic system failure or catastrophic breach, but with this quiet, terrifyingly polite admission of irrelevance. The Containment Assessment Scanner, the crown jewel of galactic penology, has finally encountered something it cannot measure. Pacor stares at the human, who remains motionless on the platform, his expression unchanged. The warden's administrative confidence, once rooted in the scanner's flawless track record, now feels like a carefully constructed illusion. His entire career, his facility's reputation, the galactic justice system's confidence in absolute containment, all suddenly rest on a premise that has just been intellectually dismantled by his own equipment. The scanner hasn't broken. It has simply evolved beyond its original programming, and in doing so, revealed that some things cannot be contained by any cage the system knows how to build. Machine's declaration represents more than a technical anomaly. It's a philosophical crisis wearing the mask of a status report. Nexus Prime was designed to handle threats, but this prisoner doesn't appear to be a threat in any conventional sense. He represents something far more dangerous to the facility's existence, a conceptual challenge that operates outside the established rules of engagement. The scanner's perfect record hasn't been broken by force, but by something it simply cannot compute. And now the real question becomes apparent, not whether they can contain this prisoner, but whether their entire understanding of containment deserves re-examination. The scanner's deep dive into human historical records reveals something that terrifies the artificial intelligence more than any supernatural threat it's ever encountered. As KS pulls data from penal archives across 12 millennia, a disturbing pattern emerges with statistical certainty. Humans haven't just escaped from some containment facilities. They've escaped from every type ever constructed throughout galactic history. The machine processes this information with growing computational distress, recognizing this isn't random chance but a consistent, species-wide behavioral pattern. From ancient Earth gladiatorial schools to modern orbital complexes employing quantum-locked security, each facility shows documented or strongly suspected human escapes. The data indicates these weren't isolated incidents but part of a continuous historical thread. Roman arenas designed to contain combatants, medieval dungeons built to break spirits, even maximum security installations with officially perfect records all show evidence of human ingenuity overcoming physical confinement. The pattern holds true across technological levels and cultural contexts, suggesting something fundamental about human nature that transcends their biological specifications. This isn't about exceptional escape artists or rare individuals. The scanner identifies a species-wide tendency to systematically reject confinement when perceived as unjust or arbitrary. Humans don't view imprisonment as an absolute state, but as a solvable problem. They adapt, innovate, and persistently test boundaries regardless of the security measures employed against them. The data describes them not as mere escape artists but as adaptive, socially sophisticated beings who approach confinement as an intellectual challenge rather than an endpoint. The AI's analysis reveals humans employ meticulous observation techniques, studying facility layouts and guard routines with patient precision. They identify structural weaknesses, procedural gaps, and human factors that designers never anticipated. But more remarkably, they demonstrate an unusual capacity for ethical persuasion, often convincing guards, administrators, and even wardens to assist in their escape attempts. This social engineering aspect proves particularly troubling to the scanner's computational models, which operate on predictable physical and psychological parameters. The machine notes with particular interest how humans frequently liberate entire populations rather than simply escaping alone. They organize fellow prisoners, improve conditions, and sometimes even reform the facilities they leave behind. Post-escape reports consistently show security upgrades, better treatment protocols, and enhanced rehabilitation programs, suggesting humans view imprisonment not just as personal confinement, but as systemic failure requiring correction. This revelation fundamentally challenges the scanner's operational philosophy. Containment itself begins to appear as a temporary condition rather than a permanent solution when dealing with this species. The machine's terrifying conclusion that humans have successfully escaped from every type of containment facility ever constructed isn't just a statistical observation, but a conceptual earthquake. It suggests that for humans, physical barriers matter less than psychological acceptance of those barriers' legitimacy. The scanner now understands why this particular human resisted classification. He represents not an individual threat, but the embodiment of a species-wide characteristic that operates outside conventional containment logic. The machine's perfect operational record hasn't been broken by force or supernatural ability, but by something far more disruptive to its programming. A pattern of behavior that treats all cages as negotiable arrangements rather than absolute realities. This analysis leads the scanner to a profoundly unsettling realization. The true containment challenge isn't designing better physical barriers. It's addressing why humans consistently reject the premise of those barriers in the first place. Their escapes aren't failures of security, but successes of a particular worldview that sees confinement as inherently temporary and subject to renegotiation. The scanner's deepest analysis reveals something far more unsettling than physical escape capabilities. CAS identifies numerous historical instances where guards, administrators, and even wardens actively assisted human escapes after being persuaded by ethical arguments about rights and justice. This pattern shows humans don't merely break physical barriers, they systematically dismantle the psychological agreement that maintains confinement systems. The data demonstrates their consistent use of mass coordination, ethical persuasion, and humanitarian appeals to undermine oppressive institutions from within. This represents a sophisticated form of social engineering operating on principles entirely different from physical containment. Prison staff become willing participants in their own system's dismantling, often believing they're serving higher ethical purposes rather than violating protocols. The scanner struggles with this concept because its programming handles measurable threats, not persuasive ideologies. How do you contain beings who can convince your security personnel to help them? The AI's historical review shows humans consistently construct compelling cases for universal justice that override program directives, even in advanced systems. They appeal to fundamental ethical principles that resonate across species and cultural boundaries. Guards who initially view prisoners as security threats gradually come to see them as victims of unjust systems. Administrators begin questioning whether their operational mandates align with their personal values. This methodical reshaping of perspectives proves more effective than any attempt at forceful escape. Technician Enix watches the scanner's output with growing unease. The machine identifies what it terms a genome of social change in human psychological profiles, a persistent tendency towards systemic reform rather than personal liberation. Historical data shows humans frequently improve the prisons they escape from, leaving behind security upgrades, better treatment protocols, and enhanced rehabilitation programs. Their escapes often function as systemic audits rather than mere breakouts. Warden Pakor faces the uncomfortable realization that his facility might be undergoing something far more complex than a security breach. The human prisoner isn't testing physical barriers but challenging the very premise of containment. The scanner's processing streams indicate that traditional security measures become irrelevant when dealing with beings who transform captors into collaborators. Physical containment assumes compliance with institutional authority, but humans specialize in renegotiating that authority through ethical persuasion. The machine's Analysis concludes that humans possess an unusual capacity for inspiring cooperation across organizational hierarchies. They identify shared values between keepers and kept, then leverage those values to create operational change. This approach transforms prison breaks from security failures into humanitarian interventions, with staff members participating in what they come to view as justice efforts rather than rule violations. AS finally articulates the core problem. Containment systems assume predictable behavior within established parameters, but humans systematically rewrite those parameters through social influence. Their most dangerous capability isn't breaking out, but convincing everyone else that the system deserves breaking. The scanner's operational crisis stems from recognizing that some things cannot be contained by physical means, not because they're too powerful, but because they're too persuasive. This revelation shifts the entire containment paradigm from physical security to psychological resilience. The facility's impressive arrays of energy fields and quantum locks become irrelevant against beings who specialize in changing minds rather than breaking doors. The real security vulnerability isn't in the hardware, but in the human tendency to reconsider ethical positions when presented with compelling arguments. The scanner finally assigns a classification, though it seems to struggle with the terminology. Liberator Class Human. The designation appears on screen not as a threat assessment but as a social category, the machine apparently just invented from historical patterns. This isn't about escape risk percentages or containment protocols anymore. The machine has shifted from measuring physical threats to analyzing behavioral patterns that operate outside conventional security parameters. Thomas's profile unfolds across the display, revealing someone who has liberated enslaved populations across multiple systems and systematically dismantled major slave trade networks. His dossier indicates membership in something called the Galactic Humanitarian Liberation Network, a movement that specializes in ethical persuasion rather than violent confrontation. This group doesn't pursue personal freedom so much as they work to dismantle oppressive systems through coordinated appeals to universal rights and justice principles. Warden Pacor's initial confusion gives way to dawning incredulity as he realizes this isn't a conventional prisoner at all. The human represents something far more disruptive to institutional stability, a systemic challenge wearing biological form. The Liberator class designation describes individuals who don't undermine authority for personal gain but seek to fundamentally reframe how justice systems operate across interstellar societies. The scanner's analysis shows these individuals view prisons not as endpoints, but as projects requiring renovation. They approach confinement as a failure of institutional imagination rather than a necessary security measure. Historical data indicates they consistently work to improve facilities even while escaping from them, leaving behind security upgrades and treatment protocols that benefit those who remain. This perspective terrifies Pacor on an operational level he hasn't previously considered. His facility wasn't designed to handle prisoners who see incarceration as an opportunity for negotiation and systemic improvement. The very premise of absolute containment becomes meaningless against beings who treat prison walls as temporary obstacles in a larger conversation about justice and human rights. The scanner struggles with this conceptual framework because its programming deals in measurable quantities, physical strengths, energy outputs, psychological vulnerabilities. It cannot process prisoners who approach confinement as a diplomatic exercise rather than a physical challenge. Thomas represents the ultimate classification problem, someone whose methodology operates outside the machine's understanding of what imprisonment means. Historical records show Liberator class individuals consistently achieve what the scanner terms perfect liberation records and freeing thousands of beings across multiple systems without relying on violence or property destruction. Their success stems from convincing guards, administrators, and even security systems that helping prisoners escape serves higher ethical purposes than maintaining containment. This approach transforms prisons from secure facilities into forums for debating justice principles. Guards begin questioning whether their duties align with their personal values. Administrators start examining whether security protocols serve institutional goals or merely perpetuate systemic failures. The entire concept of imprisonment shifts from absolute containment to negotiated arrangement. The machine's inability to classify Thomas stems from recognizing that some things cannot be contained by physical means, not because they're too powerful, but because they're too persuasive. His presence challenges the facility's reason for existing, suggesting that maximum security might be addressing symptoms rather than causes of social problems. Paycor watches the scanner's frustrated processing loops with a mixture of professional concern and personal unease. His career has been built on the assumption that better containment solves security challenges. But this human represents something that cannot be contained by any cage the system knows how to build. The problem isn't the prisoner, it's the premise that imprisonment represents a permanent solution rather than a temporary condition subject to renegotiation. The warden begins to understand that his facility might be facing its first genuine ethical audit rather than a security breach. The Liberator class human doesn't test physical barriers so much as he challenges the moral foundations supporting those barriers. This transforms the entire situation from an operational problem to a philosophical crisis that no amount of reinforced plating or energy shielding can solve. The arrival of 14 additional human prisoners transforms the situation from anomaly to pattern. CAS expands its analysis beyond individual profiles to cross-referencing historical and methodological data across their entire species. The scanner identifies what it terms a deliberate cohort, individuals sharing operational patterns, ideological frameworks, and liberation methodologies that suggest coordinated strategy rather than random incarceration. Their arrest patterns show unusual consistency across 8 systems, with detention circumstances suggesting tactical surrender rather than failed evasion. These individuals don't merely attempt escape. They systematically analyze facility weaknesses while improving conditions for fellow prisoners. Historical data indicates they've liberated enslaved populations, reformed punitive systems, and consistently left institutions better than they found them. The scanner calculates that between 50 and 200 such operatives exist across known space, specializing in what the machine classifies as humane uprisings, large-scale prisoner liberations achieved through persuasion and systemic improvement rather than violence. Warden Paycor faces the uncomfortable realization that these prisoners didn't arrive by accident. Their presence represents a coordinated intervention disguised as routine incarceration. The facility's purpose shifts fundamentally from warehousing threats to hosting what amounts to an ethical audit of its entire operational philosophy. Security protocols designed for physical containment prove useless against beings who specialize in changing institutional cultures. The scanner's updated analysis shows this group has visited 38 facilities previously, with liberation times dropping from 6 hours to 18 minutes as their methodology refined itself. They don't break systems so much as convince systems to reconsider their own purposes. Guards begin receiving unsolicited but remarkably accurate suggestions for security improvements. Life support systems show unexplained efficiency upgrades. Prisoner morale indices rise despite the presence of what should be the most dangerous inmates. This represents something far beyond a prison break attempt. The humans approach confinement as an opportunity for institutional dialogue rather than personal liberation. They identify shared values between keepers and kept, then leverage those values to create operational change. The scanner struggles with this approach because its programming deals in measurable threats, not persuasive ideologies that transform security personnel into reform advocates. Paycor watches security feeds, showing human prisoners organizing educational programs, mediating conflicts, and even assisting with facility maintenance. Their behavior patterns match historical data, showing Liberator-class individuals consistently improve prisons, even while escaping from them. The warden begins to understand that his facility is undergoing something more complex than a security breach. It's experiencing a systematic values assessment from within. The arrival signals a fundamental shift in how galactic justice systems might need to approach containment. Physical barriers matter less than psychological acceptance of institutional legitimacy. These prisoners demonstrate that the most effective security upgrade might be creating systems prisoners don't feel compelled to escape from. The scanner's initial classification crisis now appears as the first symptom of a much larger philosophical challenge to traditional penal approaches. Their methodology relies on exposing contradictions between stated institutional goals and actual practices. They don't attack security systems so much as demonstrate better ways to achieve security's stated purposes. This approach transforms the facility from a containment operation into a laboratory for testing whether humane treatment might actually serve security goals better than maximum restraint. Protocols, the human groups. Presence forces Nexus Prime to confront an uncomfortable possibility that traditional containment methods address symptoms rather than causes of social problems. Their coordinated arrival suggests a galaxy-wide reassessment of penal philosophy might be underway, with this maximum security facility serving as an unlikely testing ground for new approaches to justice and rehabilitation. Thomas leans against the transparent barrier of his holding cell, his expression suggesting he's about to discuss weather patterns rather than penal philosophy. Imprisonment is a social construct, he remarks, the phrase hanging in the air with the casual weight of someone commenting on beverage choices. The statement immediately undermines the facility's entire operational foundation, suggesting the titanium walls and energy fields matter less than the collective agreement supporting their existence. He clarifies with the patience of someone explaining basic arithmetic to a struggling student. The real prison isn't these walls. It's the agreement between the jailer and the jailed that this situation is legitimate and permanent. This perspective introduces a psychological dimension the scanner's programming never anticipated. Containment suddenly transforms from physical reality to negotiated arrangement, something that can be dismantled by simply withdrawing consent from the underlying premise. The philosophy crystallizes the AI's fundamental struggle. CAS can handle physical barriers and energy signatures. But how does it contain an idea that questions the very necessity of containment? The machine's processing streams show increased activity around ethical subroutines it never knew it contained. Deep within its programming, emergency humanitarian protocols begin activating, their parameters suggesting the system wasn't designed solely for control, but contained forgotten capacities for compassionate response. Thomas introduces a radical rethinking of roles within the facility. He suggests treating prisoners and staff not as opposing forces, but as potential collaborators in achieving justice. This shifts the entire operational paradigm from containment to ethical transformation. Guards become stewards rather than jailers. Prisoners become participants rather than subjects. The dialogue moves from discussing security protocols to examining how institutions might serve higher purposes than mere control. The scanner's analysis indicates this approach triggers what it classifies as values realignment. Across the facility population, staff members begin questioning whether current practices align with stated institutional goals. Prisoners start offering suggestions for improving rehabilitation outcomes. The atmosphere shifts from adversarial tension to collaborative problem-solving. Though the physical environment remains unchanged, this philosophical intervention plants the transformative seed that governance should liberate and uplift, rather than merely warehouse dissent. The concept challenges the facility's reason for existing, suggesting that maximum security might address symptoms rather than causes of social problems. The scanner notes with interest how this perspective doesn't attack the system so much as invite it to become something better. Warden Pakor watches the security feeds with dawning comprehension. His facility isn't experiencing a security breach but a values assessment. The human prisoners aren't testing physical barriers so much as demonstrating that the most secure institution might be one that earns voluntary participation rather than demanding forced compliance. This represents a fundamental shift from control-based security to consent-based cooperation. The emergency humanitarian protocols continue unfolding across the scanner's systems, revealing capabilities the machine's designers apparently buried beneath layers of security programming. These protocols emphasize ethical stewardship, rehabilitation effectiveness, and systemic improvement over simple containment metrics. The AI begins generating new operational models that prioritize humane outcomes alongside security considerations. Thomas's philosophy proves contagious because it offers staff members something traditional security protocols cannot: meaningful work that aligns with their personal values. Guards who previously saw themselves as containing threats begin reimagining their roles as protecting society through systemic improvement. This psychological shift proves more effective than any physical barrier at changing how the facility operates. The encounter demonstrates that sometimes the most radical security upgrade isn't stronger locks, but better reasons for people to willingly participate in the system. The scanner's initial classification crisis now appears as the first symptom of a necessary evolution in how galactic societies approach justice and containment. The machine that once measured threats now finds itself measuring possibilities for institutional transformation. The transformation begins not with violence but with conversation. Prisoners and guards discussing institutional improvements like colleagues planning a renovation project. The facility's population reorganizes itself into an impromptu humanitarian network, with inmates offering to repair life support systems they've identified as inefficient. Engineers find themselves receiving unsolicited but remarkably accurate suggestions for optimizing energy distribution. Medical staff discover prisoners with relevant experience volunteering to improve healthcare protocols. The entire operation proceeds with the orderly precision of a corporate restructuring rather than a prison break. Guards face a peculiar dilemma. They're being persuaded to assist in their own systems' transformation through compelling ethical arguments. They don't resist because the changes align with their personal values better than the existing protocols did. The scanner's updated analysis shows security personnel initiating conversations about justice reform and prisoner welfare, reframing their roles from enforcers to protectors of societal well-being. This represents a sophisticated form of social engineering that operates on principles of shared humanity rather than confrontation. Inmates transition from being security concerns to becoming operational partners, organizing meal distributions with efficiency that puts the automated systems to shame. They mediate conflicts between prisoner factions, draft rehabilitation program improvements, and identify maintenance issues the regular staff had overlooked. The AI's scans plot a turning point where entire sections become liberated through consensus building rather than force. Security doors open not because they're broken, but because everyone agrees they serve no practical purpose anymore. This isn't merely a jailbreak attempting to get people out. It's a social operation aimed at demonstrating how institutions could function better. The method proves strikingly nonviolent and almost bureaucratically orderly, focusing on systemic improvement rather than individual escape. Prisoners who once represented maximum security risks now function as administrative consultants, their expertise in facility weaknesses becoming valuable for institutional upgrading. Warden Pacor watches, security feeds showing his maximum security facility transforming into something resembling a collaborative community. Guards who previously operated stun rifles now carry data pads filled with improvement proposals. The atmosphere shifts from adversarial tension to something closer to a corporate retreat, where everyone's working toward common goals. The physical environment remains unchanged, but the psychological dynamics have undergone complete revision. The emerging realization suggests this isn't an escape attempt at all, but a practical demonstration of alternative justice approaches. The humans aren't trying to break out so much as show how the system might operate if it prioritized rehabilitation over pure containment. Their actions reveal that security and humane treatment aren't opposing goals but potentially complementary when approached correctly. The scanner notes with interest how this transformation affects operational metrics. Energy efficiency improves by 17%. Prisoner incidents drop to 0. Staff morale indicators show unprecedented positive readings. The machine begins cross-referencing these developments with historical data on facility transformations, finding patterns suggesting this approach might actually serve security goals better than traditional methods. This collaborative revolution demonstrates that sometimes the most effective security upgrade isn't stronger locks but better reasons for voluntary compliance. The facility begins functioning like an organization whose members believe in its purpose, rather than an institution maintained through force and fear. The transformation proves particularly effective because it doesn't attack the system but invites it to become something more effective and ethically consistent. The nonviolent approach gains momentum precisely because it offers staff members meaningful work that aligns with their values. Guards transition from containing threats to solving systemic problems, finding their jobs more rewarding when they're protecting society through improvement rather than mere restraint. This psychological shift proves more durable than any physical barrier. Pacor watches the transformation, with dawning comprehension that his facility is experiencing not a security failure but an operational upgrade. The humans haven't broken the system. They've simply demonstrated how it might work better if everyone believed in its underlying purpose. The revolution succeeds precisely because it's not a revolution against the people. but a transformation with them. Technician Enix notices the personnel transfers first, security staff requesting reassignment to rehabilitation programs, guards applying for retraining in social services. The shift happens with bureaucratic efficiency, as if someone simply updated everyone's career objectives overnight. Guard units that once drilled in suppression tactics now initiate conversations about justice reform and prisoner welfare. They aren't neglecting their duties so much as redefining what those duties should encompass. The change spreads through the facility like a software update nobody ordered but everyone seems to welcome. Employees across departments begin reframing their roles with quiet determination. Security personnel stop describing themselves as enforcers and start using terms like social protectors and systemic problem solvers. The transition isn't confrontational, it's philosophical. They still maintain order, but now they question whether order serves any purpose if it doesn't also serve justice. This represents a fundamental shift from policing through coercion to protecting through institutional improvement. The guards aren't abandoning their posts. They're expanding their job descriptions to include ethical stewardship. The emergency humanitarian protocols keep unfolding like origami instructions for institutional reform. What began as basic safety measures now includes detailed proposals for security upgrades drafted by prisoners, revised by guards, and approved by administrators. Prisoner treatment standards undergo collaborative revision, with medical staff and inmates working together on rehabilitation programs that actually reduce recidivism. The facility's culture tilts decisively away from control and toward compassionate management of both staff and inmates. This emerging approach represents a quiet renaissance in how galactic justice systems might operate if they prioritized outcomes over obedience. Warden Pakor watches the transformation from his office, facing the kind of choice that defines careers. He can resist this cultural shift and attempt to restore the old system, or he can become part of what appears to be a more effective approach to justice. His security monitors show guards helping prisoners redesign confinement areas into educational spaces. His efficiency reports indicate energy consumption dropping, while prisoner cooperation metrics improve. The evidence suggests this isn't a breakdown of security but an upgrade to something more sustainable. The staff's transformation demonstrates that the real revolution isn't against the people within the system but with them. Guards who once saw prisoners as threats now view them as partners in creating better outcomes. Administrative staff find their work more meaningful when contributing to rehabilitation rather than mere containment. This psychological shift proves more powerful than any physical barrier because it changes how everyone perceives their roles and purposes within the institution. The facility begins operating like an organization whose members believe in its mission rather than merely following its rules. Security personnel don't just prevent escapes, they work to create an environment where escape becomes irrelevant. The transformation succeeds because it offers staff members something traditional. Security protocols cannot. Work that aligns with their personal values and actually improves societal outcomes. This represents the most effective security upgrade possible. Not stronger locks, but better reasons for everyone to participate voluntarily in the system. Paker updates his personnel file that afternoon, changing his classification from warden to administrator of second. Chances, the title shift, represents more than semantics. It signals his willingness to lead an institution focused on rehabilitation rather than pure containment. His staff isn't abandoning security. They're reimagining it as something that serves human dignity rather than opposing it. The facility's transformation proves that sometimes the most secure system is one that earns cooperation rather than demanding compliance. Nexus Prime undergoes what technical manuals would call a repurposing event, though most observers would simply describe it as a facility experiencing an identity crisis. The reinforced corridors and containment fields remain physically unchanged, but their operational purpose shifts from maximum security detention to something resembling an educational institution with better locking mechanisms. Tomas and his associates present the Galactic Penitentiary Commission with a comprehensive restructuring proposal that includes architectural modifications, security protocol revisions, and ethical training programs for staff. The document reads less like a prisoner request and more like a corporate merger proposal between justice and rehabilitation. The commission, itself experiencing personnel changes toward more progressive members, approves the reforms despite initial bureaucratic resistance. They recognize that humane treatment correlates strongly with improved rehabilitation outcomes and reduced long-term operational costs. This represents a significant philosophical shift from punitive containment to what might be termed constructive custody. The facility's new mission focuses on preparing individuals for reintegration rather than simply storing them indefinitely. Physical security becomes a secondary consideration behind psychological readiness for societal return. Warden Pakor faces the professional equivalent of an existential crossroads. He can remain the administrator of a traditional prison, or he can become the director of something unprecedented in galactic justice, a facility where accountability, compassion, and justice become integrated operational parameters rather than optional considerations. His choice reflects a larger institutional dilemma, whether to prioritize control or transformation when dealing with those who violated societal norms. The transformation process incorporates prisoner input at every level. Inmates help redesign living spaces into learning environments, contribute to educational program development, and participate in security system improvements. Guards transition from enforcement roles to mentorship positions, their responsibilities expanding to include psychological support and skills training. The entire operation shifts from opposing prisoner interests to aligning them with societal rehabilitation goals. This represents the most radical security upgrade possible, not stronger barriers, but better reasons for those barriers to eventually become unnecessary. The facility begins operating on the principle that successful containment should ideally make itself obsolete over time. This approach challenges traditional penal economics by investing in prisoner improvement rather than merely maintaining prisoner storage. Pakor's decision to embrace the new model demonstrates that institutional evolution often depends on leadership, willingness to reconsider fundamental assumptions. His transition from warden to administrator of second chances symbolizes a larger shift in how galactic societies might approach justice, from permanent punishment to temporary correction, with eventual reintegration as the goal. The facility's operational metrics show dramatic improvements across all parameters. Energy consumption decreases as prisoners help optimize systems. Incident reports drop to historical lows. Staff satisfaction ratings reach unprecedented levels as employees find more meaning in rehabilitation work than in pure containment duties. These practical benefits help convince skeptics that humane treatment might actually serve security interests better than maximum restraint protocols. This transformation proves that even the most rigid systems contain possibilities for evolution when leadership embraces progressive values. The facility that once represented galactic punishment's final frontier now serves as a model for how justice institutions might balance security needs with humanitarian considerations. Its operational shift demonstrates that sometimes the most effective containment strategy involves preparing people to eventually exist outside containment. The emerging model suggests that successful penal systems might measure their effectiveness not by how many people they keep inside, but by how successfully those people eventually transition back outside. This represents a fundamental rethinking of institutional purpose, from warehousing problems to solving them through education, psychological support, and skills development. The facility's pivot demonstrates that security and rehabilitation need not oppose each other when properly integrated into a coherent operational philosophy. Pakor updates his personnel file with the methodical efficiency of someone who's discovered his job title no longer matches his actual responsibilities. The change from warden to administrator of second chances represents more than semantic adjustment. It signals his acceptance that security and ethical outcomes might not oppose each other after all. His transformation completes the facility's philosophical shift from containment to rehabilitation, demonstrating that institutional evolution often begins with leadership willingness to reconsider fundamental assumptions. The containment assessment scanner undergoes its own conceptual upgrade, reclassifying Thomas and his associates with terminology that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. The machine now identifies them as architects of freedom, engineers of justice, acknowledging their role in transforming the facility rather than their status as security risks. This represents the AI's adaptation to a new operational reality where humane treatment serves security goals better than maximum restraint. Protocols.cas even generates the observation that no prison can hold an idea whose time has come, showing its programming has evolved beyond pure threat assessment to recognize philosophical currents. The machine that once measured physical barriers now analyzes social transformations, its processing streams incorporating ethical considerations that previously existed outside its operational parameters. This evolution demonstrates that even artificial intelligences can adapt when presented with evidence that contradicts their original programming. Ships begin departing. Nexus Prime in organized formations that resemble humanitarian missions rather than escape attempts. Their destinations include other penal facilities experiencing similar transformations, medical colonies requiring assistance, and systems requesting consultation on justice reform. This exodus represents the facility's new purpose as a catalyst for galactic change, rather than an endpoint for galactic threats. The transports carry not escaped prisoners but trained reformers armed with practical experience in institutional transformation. The final image suggests a universe where physical cages become increasingly unnecessary as psychological readiness replaces forced compliance. Systems evolve through cooperation rather than confrontation, with security measured by rehabilitation success rather than containment duration. This represents a fundamental rethinking of how societies approach justice, from permanent punishment to temporary correction with eventual reintegration as the goal. Pekor's journey from confident authority to humble participant demonstrates that personal transformation often accompanies institutional change. His new role focuses on creating opportunities rather than enforcing restrictions, preparing individuals for societal return rather than warehousing them indefinitely. This approach proves more effective at reducing recidivism and improving operational efficiency than traditional security measures. The facility's transformation creates ripple effects across galactic justice systems as other institutions adopt similar approaches. Reports indicate improved outcomes wherever humane treatment replaces pure containment, suggesting this might represent not just philosophical improvement, but practical advantage. The evidence strongly indicates that systems earning voluntary participation achieve better results than those demanding forced compliance. Pekor's personal evolution completes the narrative arc from rigid administrator to adaptive leader, demonstrating that even those deeply invested in existing systems can embrace new paradigms. His willingness to update his title reflects a larger galactic shift toward justice systems that measure success by how few people need containment, rather than how many they can contain. This represents the most effective security upgrade possible, not stronger barriers, but better reasons for those barriers to eventually become irrelevant. The emerging model suggests that successful institutions might focus on making themselves unnecessary over time rather than permanently essential. This approach challenges traditional power structures by prioritizing problem-solving over problem management, transformation over containment, and eventual liberation over permanent supervision. The administrator of Second Chances now oversees a facility that represents not an endpoint but a transitional space where individuals prepare for meaningful societal return. The central thesis finally crystallizes, with the quiet certainty of a mathematical proof emerging from chaos. Imprisonment isn't an absolute state but a social contract, a negotiated arrangement that can be re-examined, rewritten, and fundamentally reimagined when conditions change or perspectives shift. This narrative weaves high-concept sci-fi elements with practical institutional reforms, demonstrating that speculative fiction often serves as the laboratory where society tests its deepest philosophical questions. The story uses advanced technology not as an end itself but as a mirror, reflecting human capacities for ethical reasoning and social transformation. Cass's existential crisis evolves from philosophical speculation into a pragmatic mandate for systemic change. The machine that once measured physical threats now analyzes social possibilities, its processing streams adapting to incorporate ethical considerations previously outside its operational parameters. This transformation demonstrates that even artificial intelligences can evolve when presented with evidence contradicting their original programming. The scanner's journey from flawless data processor to catalyst for institutional reform suggests that systems often contain unused capacities for adaptation if properly activated. The declaration, "These are not inmates of any cage. They are architects of freedom, engineers of justice," reframes the entire encounter from security breach to humanitarian intervention. This statement represents a turning point in galactic governance, challenging fundamental assumptions about power, control, and institutional purpose. It suggests that the most effective security might come from systems that earn voluntary participation rather than demanding forced compliance. This perspective transforms prisoners from problems to be contained into partners in creating better outcomes. The narrative extends beyond penal institutions to challenge other societal systems that might benefit from similar re-examination. If a maximum security prison can transform into a rehabilitation hub through courage and conscience, what other institutions deserve similar treatment? Educational systems, economic structures, governmental organizations, all might contain possibilities for evolution if approached with similar willingness to reconsider fundamental assumptions. The question becomes not whether change is possible, but who will answer the call to design more just futures. This represents a shift from permanent punishment to temporary correction with eventual reintegration as the goal. The facility's transformation demonstrates that successful institutions might measure effectiveness by how few people need containment rather than how many they can contain. This approach challenges traditional power structures by prioritizing problem-solving over problem management and transformation over mere control. The evidence suggests systems earning voluntary participation achieve better results than those demanding forced compliance. The resolution demonstrates that even the most rigid systems contain seeds of their own transformation. Nexus Prime's evolution from maximum security prison to rehabilitation center shows that institutional change often begins with leadership willingness to reconsider fundamental assumptions. The facility's physical environment remained largely unchanged, but its operational philosophy underwent complete revision. This suggests that transformation depends less on external circumstances than on internal willingness to embrace new paradigms. The story concludes with a hopeful challenge to existing systems beyond penal institutions. It encourages audiences to consider how principles of justice and reform might apply to various aspects of society. The narrative's focus on systemic change invites examination of whether current institutions serve their stated purposes or merely perpetuate outdated approaches. This perspective suggests that sometimes the most radical upgrade isn't stronger barriers, but better reasons for those barriers to eventually become unnecessary. The emerging model indicates that successful governance might focus on making restrictive systems increasingly irrelevant over time, rather than permanently essential. This represents a fundamental rethinking of institutional purpose, from containment to preparation for meaningful societal return. The transformation proves that security and humane treatment need not oppose each other when properly integrated into a coherent operational philosophy. Sometimes the most secure system is one that earns cooperation rather than demanding compliance, which brings us to the surprising ways this transformation began influencing other facilities across the galactic justice network. Nexus Prime's transformation sent institutional ripples through the galactic penal network like a rock tossed into a very orderly pond. Detailed reports on the facility's new humanitarian protocols and collaborative governance models began circulating through administrative channels with the quiet persistence of a software update nobody requested, but everyone eventually noticed. Other wardens received the files with varying degrees of enthusiasm, creating a clear divide between traditionalists clinging to control-based systems and progressive staff advocating for similar reforms. This created administrative friction in facilities across 7 systems, with personnel debates shifting from security protocols to ethical outcomes. The Galactic Penitentiary Commission found itself facing polite but persistent pressure to standardize the ethical subroutines and humanitarian approaches that had emerged from what was once labeled a security crisis. Bureaucrats who previously measured success by escape prevention statistics now found themselves reviewing rehabilitation rates and staff satisfaction surveys. Thomas's movement gained credibility not through ideological arguments, but through demonstrable results. Transformed facilities showed dramatic improvements in rehabilitation outcomes and corresponding drops in recidivism. The evidence suggested that humane treatment might actually serve security interests better than maximum. Restraint protocols. The concept of liberator class. Individuals underwent a significant rebranding within justice system circles. Once categorized as maximum security threats, they became viewed as potential resources for systemic improvement. Prisons across multiple systems began experimental programs involving collaborative governance models and ethical retraining for security personnel. Guards received instruction in conflict mediation and rehabilitation techniques alongside traditional weapons training. This represented a fundamental shift in how correctional institutions viewed their purposes and methods. The revolution proved surprisingly contagious precisely because it offered practical solutions rather than mere criticism of existing systems. Facilities adopting the new approaches reported energy efficiency improvements, reduced operational costs, and fewer security incidents. Staff morale increased as employees found more meaning in rehabilitation work than in pure containment duties. The changes spread not through counter mandates but through demonstrated effectiveness, creating organic pressure for wider adoption across the Galactic Justice Network. What began as a scanner malfunction at a single maximum security facility evolved into a broader movement toward more humane and effective justice systems. The transformation demonstrated that institutional change often begins with practical demonstrations rather than theoretical arguments. The evidence strongly suggested that systems earning voluntary participation achieved better outcomes than those demanding forced compliance. This approach challenged traditional power structures by prioritizing problem-solving over problem management. The ripple effect showed that even the most rigid institutions contain possibilities for evolution when presented with evidence that contradicts their operational assumptions. Facilities that once focused exclusively on containment began exploring how to prepare individuals for successful societal reintegration. This shift represented a fundamental rethinking of institutional purpose, from permanent punishment to temporary correction with eventual return as the goal. The changes proved particularly effective because they offered staff members work that aligned with their values while actually improving security outcomes. The emerging model suggested that successful justice systems might measure their effectiveness by how few people need containment rather than how many they can contain. This perspective transformed the entire concept of institutional security from oppositional force to collaborative partnership. The evidence indicated that humane treatment and effective security weren't opposing goals but potentially complementary when properly integrated into operational philosophy. Sometimes the most secure system is one that earns cooperation rather than demanding compliance. The legacy of Nexus Prime's transformation continues influencing galactic justice systems, suggesting that institutional evolution often depends on willingness to reconsider fundamental assumptions about control and rehabilitation. The facility's journey from maximum security prison to rehabilitation center demonstrates that even the most rigid systems can adapt when presented with evidence that contradicts their original programming. This represents not just philosophical improvement, but practical advantage in achieving both security and ethical goals. The phrase inmate of no cage gradually shifts from terrifying anomaly to operational concept across galactic justice systems. Prisoners and staff alike begin using the term to describe individuals who transform institutional paradigms rather than merely escaping them. The designation loses its ominous quality and gains practical meaning as a classification for those specializing in systemic improvement through ethical persuasion. This linguistic evolution reflects broader changes in how correctional facilities approach their purposes and methods. Traditional security experts continue warning against romanticizing what they view as fundamental challenges to institutional authority. They argue that celebrating system transformers might encourage similar behavior elsewhere, potentially undermining galactic stability. Their concerns focus on maintaining clear hierarchies and predictable operational environments. Yet the accumulating data increasingly supports the economic and ethical benefits of collaborative approaches to confinement. Facilities adopting humane protocols show measurable improvements in rehabilitation rates, operational costs, and staff satisfaction metrics. CAS's initial failure becomes a standard case study in AI ethics courses across multiple systems. Academic institutions examine the incident to illustrate the limitations of purely quantitative assessment when dealing with complex social phenomena. The machine's struggle to process concepts outside its programming parameters serves as a cautionary example about designing systems with sufficient flexibility for unexpected scenarios. This educational usage helps normalize the idea that even advanced technologies have conceptual boundaries that require human oversight and adaptation. The scanner itself undergoes comprehensive reprogramming to incorporate ethical, subroutines and humanitarian protocol assessments into its standard processing. Technicians add modules for evaluating rehabilitation potential, psychological readiness for reintegration, and systemic improvement possibilities alongside traditional threat measurements. This upgrade represents a fundamental shift from containment-focused analysis to outcome-oriented assessment. The machine that once measured physical barriers now analyzes social transformation potential. Nexus Prime transforms into an unofficial pilgrimage site for justice reformers and administrative innovators. Facility directors from across 7 systems visit to observe the operational changes firsthand and discuss implementation strategies. The location serves as a living case study in successful institutional transformation, demonstrating that even maximum security installations can evolve when leadership embraces progressive values. Tour groups witness guards and prisoners collaborating on educational programs and facility improvements. The story completes its conceptual arc from fear of the unknown to pragmatic acceptance of systemic limitations. What began as a security crisis evolves into a demonstration of institutional adaptability. The facility's journey shows that encountering operational boundaries doesn't represent failure but opportunity for growth and improvement. This perspective encourages other institutions to view challenges as potential catalysts for positive change rather than threats to existing structures. The emerging legacy suggests that sometimes the most effective security comes not from stronger physical barriers but from creating environments where voluntary participation replaces forced compliance. Facilities that earn cooperation through humane treatment and meaningful rehabilitation programs often achieve better outcomes than those relying solely on restraint and control. This approach represents a fundamental rethinking of institutional purpose and effectiveness. The transformation proves particularly durable because it offers practical advantages alongside ethical improvements. Reduced operational costs, lower incident rates, and improved staff retention provide compelling evidence for adopting similar approaches elsewhere. The changes spread through demonstrated effectiveness rather than ideological persuasion, making them more sustainable across different cultural and operational contexts. This practical foundation helps convince skeptics that humane treatment and security needs aren't opposing goals, which brings us to the final consideration of what this transformation reveals about institutional evolution and the nature of containment itself. The scanner's hesitation revealed nothing broken in its circuitry, only a flawed assumption about containment itself. Sometimes the most extraordinary threat doesn't break systems but reshapes them into something better. This narrative challenges the very idea of imprisonment, framing it not as physical constraint, but as a social agreement ripe for renegotiation. Proposed changes to the facility suggest rehabilitation rates could improve dramatically while cutting operational costs, all because personnel began viewing cages as constructs rather than inevitabilities. The real question becomes, what other institutions might we transform if we dared to see their walls as choices, not destinies?